The first time I held the keys to my parents' new house, I almost dropped them. Not because they were heavy, because I knew exactly what those keys meant. 7 years earlier, my parents had spent nearly $200,000 on my brother Daniel's wedding. They rented a luxury venue outside Nashville, flew in relatives, paid for an elaborate reception, booked hotel rooms, and even helped Daniel and his wife put a down payment on their first home. For my wedding, my parents did something very different. They didn't come. Not my mother. Not my father. Not even for an hour. They didn't walk me down the aisle. They didn't take a single photograph with me. They didn't even call afterward. And yet, 7 years later, I stood in the driveway of a brand new house, holding the keys to a property that my parents had spent years dreaming about. My mother was standing on the front porch. My father was beside her, and when my mother saw the keys in my hand, her face went completely pale. "You have no right to those," she whispered. I looked at my father. He couldn't meet my eyes. That was when I finally understood something. The wedding wasn't the real reason they had abandoned me. It had been the beginning of a much bigger lie. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how the daughter my parents treated like an afterthought became the person they had no choice but to depend on. Growing up, I learned very early that my brother Daniel and I lived in the same house, but we didn't live the same life. Daniel was 4 years older than me, and from the time we were kids, my parents treated him like the center of their world. He was their pride, their big dream, their investment. And I was the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble, the one who could wait. I used to joke about it when I was younger. "Don't worry," I would tell my friends. My parents saved all their enthusiasm for my brother. I said it like it didn't bother me, but it did. It bothered me every time my dad canceled something with me because Daniel had a practice, an appointment, or a problem. It bothered me when my mom would spend an entire weekend planning Daniel's future and then ask me, almost as an afterthought, "So, what are you doing these days?" Daniel was charming. He knew how to walk into a room and make people feel like they were important. I was different. I was careful. I thought before I spoke. I worked hard. I didn't ask for much. And for a long time, I thought being easy to love was the same thing as being loved. When Daniel got accepted into an expensive college, my parents celebrated for weeks. When I earned a scholarship to a smaller school, my father nodded and said, "That's good, sweetheart." That was it. No party, no dinner, no photographs, just, "That's good." I told myself it wasn't important. I had a scholarship. I had a plan. I wanted to become a financial analyst, and I knew I could build a life without anyone handing me the pieces. Daniel, meanwhile, changed majors twice. He bought a new car while still in school. My parents paid his insurance. When he decided he wanted to start a business with a friend, my father gave him money to get it off the ground. When the business failed, Bitta called it a learning experience. If I spent $20 too much at the grocery store, my mother would ask if I was being responsible. That was my family. Then Daniel met Megan. Megan was beautiful, confident, and very good at making my parents feel as though they had raised the most successful son in America. Within 6 months, Daniel proposed. My mother cried. My father shook his hand and said, "Welcome to the family." The wedding planning started almost immediately. I remember sitting at my parents' kitchen table while my mother flipped through venue brochures. "This one is gorgeous," she said. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. "That's the one." My mother looked at the price. $28,000 just for the venue. My father shrugged. "You only get married once." I laughed softly. Daniel looked at me. "What?" "Nothing," I said. But inside, I was thinking about how my father had once spent 3 weeks arguing with me because I wanted a $600 computer for college. He called it unnecessary. $28,000 for a wedding venue was apparently an investment. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. They weren't paying for a wedding. They were paying for the version of Daniel they wanted the world to see. Everything about the wedding had to be impressive. There was a live band, a huge floral display, a professional photographer, a luxury transportation service, a custom cake, a rehearsal dinner, a designer dress, and hotel rooms for relatives who were flying in. My parents didn't just contribute, they took control. My mother spent weeks making spreadsheets. My father handled contracts. They talked about the wedding like it was the biggest event our family had ever produced. And maybe to them, it was. The entire thing eventually cost close to $200,000. I know that number because I saw the statements. I wasn't snooping. My mother asked me to help organize some receipts. I noticed the totals. I stared at the number. 19,8740美元. I remember saying, Mom, this is almost $200,000. She smiled. It's for your brother. The way she said it made the statement feel complete, as if those 4 words explained everything. It's for your brother. I smiled back. I know. I didn't tell her how strange that sentence felt, because 3 weeks later, I met someone who would eventually become my husband. His name was Ethan. He worked in engineering, had a dry sense of humor, and didn't care how much money anyone made. The first time I took him to my parents' house, he noticed the imbalance immediately. After dinner, as we drove away, he said, "Your family treats your brother differently." I looked out the window. They always have. That doesn't bother you? It used to. And now? I smiled. Now I'm getting used to not expecting anything. He reached over and squeezed my hand. You shouldn't have to. That sentence stayed with me, because Ethan saw something I had spent years trying not to see. My parents didn't just favor Daniel. They expected me to accept being second. When Ethan proposed, I didn't announce it immediately. I was scared. Not of getting married, of telling my parents. When I finally did, my mother stared at my ring. That's nice. My father smiled. Congratulations. Then my mother looked at the calendar. When's Daniel's wedding? I blinked. 5 months from now. And yours? We were thinking about the fall. She nodded. Well, make sure you don't pick a date too close to his. We have a lot going on. That was my engagement announcement. Not exactly the celebration I had imagined. I told myself it was fine. Ethan and I wanted a smaller wedding anyway. We planned to marry at a beautiful little venue in Kentucky, not far from where we lived. Nothing extravagant. About 80 guests. Good food. A small band. Flowers from a local florist. A simple dress. We didn't want to start our marriage with debt. When I told my parents the details, my mother looked disappointed. That's it? I laughed. Yes, that's it. You're not doing anything bigger? No. My father said, well, that's your choice. I knew what he meant. Daniel's wedding was a celebration. Mine was a choice. Still, I invited them. Of course I did. They were my parents. Some part of me believed they might surprise me. Maybe all the years of being overlooked would change when I walked down the aisle. Maybe my mother would cry. Maybe my father would take my hand. Maybe they would finally see me. A month before my wedding, my mother called. Emily, I need to talk to you. Her voice sounded strange. What happened? Your father and I have been thinking. About what? Your wedding. I sat down. What about it? Well, Daniel's wedding is 5 weeks before yours. I know. And we've already spent so much. I didn't say anything. She continued. We don't think we'll be able to attend. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. What? It's just complicated. My heart started beating faster. You're not coming? We've been traveling so much for Daniel's wedding. Mom, your own daughter is getting married. We know. Then come. We can't. I could hear papers moving in the background. I swallowed. Is this because of money? No. Then what is it? We just think it would be too much. Too much for what? She sighed. Emily, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. You're really not coming? No. I waited for my father to get on the phone. He never did. That night, I told Ethan. He sat beside me on the couch. They're really not coming? I nodded. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, You don't have to pretend this doesn't hurt. That was when I broke down. I cried for the little girl who had spent years trying to be good enough, for the teenager who had stopped asking for things, for the daughter who had convinced herself that someday her parents would notice. And now I was getting married, and they were choosing not to be there. We almost canceled the wedding. Not because of them, because I was exhausted. But Ethan refused. No, he said. We are not allowing their absence to become the biggest thing about our marriage. So we moved forward. My wedding day came. 80 people filled the venue. Friends, Co-workers, Ethan's family, my Aunt Linda, a few cousins, and one empty row near the front that no one talked about. I walked down the aisle alone. I had imagined my father beside me. Instead, my best friend Rachel held my arm. When I looked toward the front, I saw Ethan smiling, and for the first time that day, I stopped thinking about who wasn't there. I thought about who was. We said our vows. We laughed. We danced. We cut the cake. And when the evening ended, Ethan and I drove away as husband and wife. My mother didn't call. My father didn't call. Not that night. Not the next day. 3 days later, I received a message from my mother. Hope everything went well. That was it. I stared at my phone for several minutes. Then I deleted the message. I didn't block her. I wasn't ready for that. But something inside me had changed. I stopped chasing them. I stopped asking them to include me. I stopped explaining my life. And that was when my marriage began. Ethan and I rented a small house. We budgeted carefully. We bought used furniture. We built our savings slowly. Neither of us came from families where money came easily, so we learned how to make every dollar count. 2 years into our marriage, I received a promotion. Ethan started working on larger projects. We saved. Then we bought our first house. It wasn't huge, but it was ours. When my mother heard, she said, "That's nice." When Daniel bought a larger house a few months later, she called me 3 times to tell me about it. That was my life. And honestly, I became okay with it. I stopped needing their approval. But then Daniel's perfect life began to crack. First, his business partner left. Then the business started losing money. Then Daniel and Megan began fighting. At Thanksgiving, I noticed Daniel barely speaking. My mother was doing everything possible to keep the conversation cheerful. "How beautiful is that new house?" she kept saying. Megan smiled. "Thank you." I looked at my brother. He avoided my eyes. A few months later, I found out why. Daniel had taken out several loans. The business was struggling. Their home payment was much higher than they could comfortably manage. And my parents had been quietly helping them. Again, every few weeks, my mother would mention something like, "We had to help Daniel with a little situation." A little situation. One afternoon, I asked her directly, "How much money have you given him?" She looked offended. "I don't keep track." "That's not true." "Why does it matter?" "Because you keep telling me you don't have money." She folded her arms. "We have enough." "For what?" She didn't answer. Then she said something that hurt more than I expected. "You're doing fine. Daniel needs us more." There it was. The sentence that explained our entire childhood. "You're doing fine." Because I was responsible, I deserved less. Because I could survive without them, I deserved less. Because Daniel needed rescuing, he deserved everything. I stopped arguing. Years passed. Then, one afternoon, my father called me. I almost didn't answer. "Emily." His voice sounded tired. "Hi, Dad. I need to ask you something." "What?" "Your mother and I are thinking about moving." "That sounds nice. We want to buy a newer house." I frowned. "Why?" "The neighborhood we're in has gotten expensive." "So you're selling?" "Yes. And we want a place with fewer repairs." I didn't think much of it. Then he said, "We may need help with the paperwork." I almost laughed. My parents had never needed me before. Suddenly, they did. I agreed. I work in finance, and I had enough experience to help them review mortgage documents, closing estimates, property taxes, and insurance. They wanted a beautiful new house outside the city. It was more expensive than anything they had owned before. I remember looking at the numbers. "Are you sure you can afford this?" My father frowned. "Yes." My mother smiled. "We've planned for it." I didn't argue. They put their old house on the market. The house sold quickly. They found a new construction property. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a large kitchen, a finished basement, a 2-car garage, a beautiful front porch. My mother was thrilled. She sent me pictures every week. We picked the countertops. We chose the flooring. Look at the backyard. For the first time in years, she sounded like the mother I remembered from childhood. Excited, hopeful, warm, and despite everything, I felt happy for her. Maybe I was finally letting go. Maybe I was finally able to care without expecting anything back. Then, 2 months before closing, everything changed. My father called me late one evening. "Emily, we need you to come over." "What happened?" "Please." When I arrived, both my parents were sitting at the kitchen table. My mother looked like she had been crying. "What's wrong?" My father pushed a folder toward me. I opened it. My name was on the first page. I stared at it. "What is this?" My father looked down. "We made a decision." I flipped through the documents. There were legal agreements, financial disclosures, property information, and something else, a transfer agreement. I looked at him. "Why is my name on this?" My mother started crying. My father finally spoke. "The house is going to be yours." I thought I had heard him incorrectly. "What?" "The new house. You're giving it to me?" "No." He shook his head. "We're putting it in your name." I stared at both of them. "Why?" My mother covered her face. My father took a breath. "Because we made a mistake." I almost stood up. "A mistake?" He nodded. "Several, actually." Then came the truth. The money they were using to buy the new house wasn't really theirs. Years earlier, my father had invested a large portion of his retirement savings into a private business opportunity Daniel had recommended. It had gone badly. My parents lost a substantial amount. Then, instead of admitting they were in trouble, they borrowed more money. Daniel had encouraged it. He told them everything would recover. It didn't. Their old home was nearly paid off, but once they sold it, most of the proceeds were needed to cover debts. The new house was financed, but the payments were higher than they could handle. My mother looked at me. "We can't afford the house." I felt my stomach drop. "Then why did you buy it?" My father closed his eyes. "Because we thought Daniel would help." I almost laughed. "Daniel?" My mother nodded. "He promised." There was silence. "Where is he?" "He's gone." "What do you mean?" My father slid another paper across the table. Daniel and Megan had separated. Daniel had moved to another state. He had left behind debt, unpaid bills, and an angry collection of people who wanted money. My mother started crying again. "He said he would come back." "And?" "He didn't." I stared at the paperwork. "So you bought a house you can't afford? Because you thought Daniel would rescue you?" My father looked ashamed. "Yes." I felt something inside me break. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. For years, they had built their lives around the belief that Daniel would eventually become the person who saved them. And now, when that belief collapsed, they were looking at me, the daughter they had spent years overlooking. I stood up. "No." My mother looked at me. "What?" "I'm not doing this." "Emily!" "No." My voice was calm. That surprised even me. "You cannot spend my entire life choosing him, ignoring me, and then hand me your problems when he disappears." My father whispered, "We know." "No, you don't." My voice shook. "You don't know what it felt like." My mother looked at me. "I know you're hurt. That's not the point." I put the folder down. "You want me to take responsibility for a house you bought because you believed your favorite child would take care of you." My father looked down. Then he said something I never expected. "We know we failed you." The room went quiet. I looked at him. He continued, "We thought Daniel needed us more." My eyes filled with tears. "And now?" He looked at me. "Now we realize you were the one who never needed anything from us because you were always strong enough to stand alone." I shook my head. "That doesn't make it okay." "No," my father said. "It doesn't." I went home that night. I barely slept. Ethan sat beside me. "You don't have to fix this." "I know." "Then don't." I stared at the ceiling. "What if I can?" He looked at me. "What?" "What if I can fix it?" "You can't fix what they did." "No." I turned toward him. "But maybe I can decide what happens next." The next morning, I called a real estate attorney. I wanted to know exactly what the paperwork meant. And that was when I discovered another surprise. My father hadn't simply put the house in my name. He had legally transferred the property to me in exchange for assuming the financial responsibility attached to it. The house was mine, but so was the burden. If I accepted it, I would become responsible for the remaining payments, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. If I rejected it, my parents would likely lose the property. There was no magical free house. There never was. It was a choice, a very expensive one. I spent 3 days reviewing everything. I looked at the mortgage, the property value, the taxes, the debt. I ran the numbers again and again. And finally, I saw something my parents had never seen. The house wasn't actually impossible to afford. It was impossible for them to afford, but not for me. Ethan and I had saved carefully for years. We had no major debt. Our income was stable. We could manage the payment, and the property itself was worth more than the remaining loan. It could be a good investment, but I still wasn't sure. Then I received a call from Daniel. I hadn't heard from him in almost 2 years. Emily? I almost hung up. What do you want? I heard about Mom and Dad. From who? Mom. What about them? The house. I stayed silent. He continued. Look, I need a favor. I laughed softly. Of course you do. Emily. What? I want you to give me the house. I actually smiled. You're kidding. No. Why would I do that? Because it's family. Those 3 words nearly made me lose my temper. Family? Yes. The family that spent $200,000 on your wedding and didn't even come to mine? Silence. Then he said, that was Mom and Dad's decision. And you enjoyed every dollar of it. That's not fair. No? No. I stood up. You know what isn't fair? Watching my parents spend their time, money, and attention on you while telling me I should be grateful for scraps. He sighed. I'm struggling. I closed my eyes. There it was. The same story again. Daniel needed help. Daniel was struggling. Daniel needed rescuing. And everyone expected me to care. I said, I'm sorry you're struggling. Then help me. No. He was silent. Then his voice changed. You're really going to let Mom and Dad lose the house? I thought about it. I haven't decided. You're selfish. I hung up. That night, I told Ethan about the conversation. He asked, what are you going to do? I looked at the financial papers. I'm going to save the house. But why? Not for them. Then for who? I smiled. For me. Over the next few weeks, I negotiated with the lender, reviewed the property, and made an offer. I would take over the mortgage. I would pay off the immediate debts tied to the property. My parents would be allowed to live there for a limited period while they found a smaller place, and they would have no ownership claim afterward. Everything would be documented. My father agreed immediately. My mother hesitated. Then she said, You're not taking the house away from us, are you? I looked at her. You already told me it was mine. She looked ashamed. I know. The paperwork was signed. The property officially became mine. My parents moved into the house temporarily. For the first time in my life, I was the one responsible for the place. Not because they chose me, because they had run out of choices. And strangely, that gave me peace. I expected them to treat me differently. They did. But not immediately. My mother became overly grateful. She started calling every few days. Thank you. Of course. We don't know what we would have done. I know. My father became quieter. He did little things around the house. He fixed a door, repaired a fence, painted a room. One Saturday, he came to me and said, I'm sorry. I looked at him. He nodded toward the driveway. For everything. I didn't answer. He continued. I was so focused on what I thought Daniel would become that I never noticed what you already were. I looked away. That sentence hurt, because it was the sentence I had waited my entire life to hear. But hearing it this late didn't erase anything. I needed you to see me when I was a kid, I said. I know. I needed you at my wedding. I know. I needed you to believe I mattered before you needed something from me. His eyes filled with tears. I know. That was all he could say. And for once, I didn't ask him for more. My mother took longer. One evening, she came into the kitchen while I was visiting. She placed a small box on the counter. What's that? Open it. Inside were old photographs. Pictures of me as a little girl. School events. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. I stared at them. Where did you find these? I kept them. I picked up one photograph. I was 6 years old. My father was holding me. My mother was laughing beside us. Daniel was standing in the background. For a moment, I remembered what it felt like to be loved. Or at least, what I thought love felt like. My mother sat down. I spent years believing that being fair meant giving each child what they needed. I said nothing. I didn't understand that I was teaching you that you needed less. I looked at her. She wiped her eyes. And I was wrong. I didn't forgive her immediately. I didn't hug her. I didn't say everything was okay. I simply said, I believe you're sorry. She nodded. That's enough for now. A few months later, my parents moved into a smaller townhouse. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't impressive. There was no huge kitchen, no giant yard, no expensive finishes. But they could afford it. They were no longer living beyond their means. My father went back to work part-time. My mother started volunteering at a local community center. And slowly, their lives became ordinary. For the first time, they had to live without trying to prove anything. Daniel eventually came back. Not with a dramatic apology. Not with a miraculous transformation. He came back because he needed a place to stay. My parents let him stay with them for a few weeks. But they didn't give him money. That was new. When he asked my father for help with another business idea, my father said no. When he asked my mother to co-sign a loan, she refused. Daniel was furious. He called me. You changed them. I smiled. No, I can't believe you. You're right. What? I changed myself. He went quiet. I stopped rescuing people who never learned how to stand on their own. He hung up. I never heard from him for a long time. And strangely, I was okay with that. 7 years after my wedding, Ethan and I went back to my parents' old neighborhood. The new house had become a beautiful part of our lives. We had renovated the kitchen, added a small office, planted flowers, painted the front porch. It was no longer a symbol of betrayal. It was simply our home. The keys I had once been afraid to hold were now attached to my own keychain. One Sunday afternoon, my parents came over. My mother stood in the driveway. She looked at the house, then at me. You know, she said, I never imagined this. What? That you would be the one owning it. I smiled. Neither did I. My father laughed softly. Life has a strange sense of humor. We stood there in silence. Then my mother said, Do you ever wish you had walked away completely? I thought about it. Sometimes. And do you regret staying? I shook my head. No. Why? Because I didn't stay for you. She looked at me. I stayed because I wanted to become someone who could choose what happened next without being controlled by what happened before. My father nodded slowly. That sounds like you. I smiled. Maybe for the first time in my life, they knew who I was. Not Daniel's sister. Not the responsible daughter. Not the child who needed less. Just Emily, their daughter. A woman who had built a life they had once failed to imagine for her. My mother stepped closer. I owe you more than money. I know. I wish I could go back. So do I. She looked at me. Would you change anything? I thought for a moment. Then I said, I would stop waiting for you to choose me. She started crying. I reached out and hugged her. Not because everything had been erased, but because I finally understood that forgiveness and forgetting were not the same thing. I could forgive them. I could love them. And I could still remember what they had done. Those things could exist together. A year later, my father gave me an envelope. Inside was a letter. I opened it at our kitchen table. He had written about the past. About Daniel. About the wedding. About the years when they had believed they were making the right choices. At the end, he wrote, We spent so much money trying to build a perfect life for the child we thought would carry our name forward. We never realized the daughter we overlooked was the one quietly building a life strong enough to carry herself. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I folded the letter. I kept it. Not because I needed proof. Because sometimes the apology you waited for finally arrives after you no longer need it to heal. And that was the greatest lesson my family ever taught me. People talk about karma as if it always looks like revenge. As if the person who hurt you has to suffer exactly the way you suffered. That wasn't what happened to my parents. They didn't lose everything. They didn't become miserable. They simply had to live with the consequences of their choices. They learned that money spent on appearances doesn't create security. They learned that constantly rescuing one person can destroy an entire family. They learned that the child who asks for the least still deserves to be loved. And Daniel? He eventually built a smaller, quieter life. He stopped chasing businesses that promised fast success. He got a steady job. He apologized to my parents. He never apologized properly to me. And strangely, I stopped needing him to. Because the greatest revenge I could have taken would have been to become bitter. Instead, I became free. I built a marriage I was proud of. I bought a home. I grew a career. I made friends who showed up. I created traditions that included people who actually wanted to be there. And every year, on the anniversary of my wedding, Ethan and I celebrated home. Not with a $200,000 party. Not with a room full of people trying to impress each other. Just dinner, a bottle of sparkling cider, a few photographs, and a reminder that the most important people in your life are the ones who show up, the people who stay, the people who don't need a reason to stand beside you. Sometimes I think about that empty row at my wedding. I used to hate looking at that photograph. Now I don't. Because that empty row no longer represents rejection. It represents the exact moment I stopped waiting.